Welcome back to another edition of This Week in 3 Minutes. Titled this one, The Third Rail. You notice my voice sounds a little funny. It's probably due to the weather in Ontario going up and down like a toilet seat the last few weeks. Speaking of toilet seats, Bitcoin. $20,000 per coin in December, $10,000 this week. I mean, if that isn't a yo-yo effect, I mean, that is not a stable asset in the least. In fact, a lot of people are divesting of their Bitcoin or cryptocurrency holdings right now. It's just, it's so volatile. They're happy with the returns they've got. They're moving out. And coincidentally, there appear to be many of them moving into gold. There's one coin dealer I know of who has seen a 5-fold increase in purchases just the last week or so, which tells us that a lot of people are questioning the idea of cryptocurrencies as a store of value. Okay, so, well, at least we can be grateful for the fact that the cryptocurrencies at least brought the discussion of what is money to the public's mind again. I'm actually quite thrilled about that. So this week we've got the potential for a government shutdown in the United States. That could be really interesting. Who knows, it may even trigger sort of a flight to safety or trigger a fear or panic. I don't know what's going to happen there, but we'll keep watching and we'll see. The Petro Yuan oil contract was supposed to go live this week. We'll wait and see how that affects the markets, especially the energy markets. And we also noted this week that just in the last few months, really, the Chinese Treasury holding went from U.S. Treasury holding went from 1.3 trillion down to a little better than 1 trillion, which is a $300 billion decline in the amount of U.S. Treasuries they're holding. So I don't know if that's going to lead to some pretty strong inflation, but when you do the math, 2% decline in the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar this week, multiply that over the next 12 months. I mean, looks like inflation's around the corner, folks. Okay, moving on to Basel III and zero risk weighting and capital adequacy standard, all this fancy language. How does that relate to you and I? How does that relate to the average Joe? What does that mean? The reason why I've called this is this issue, the third rail, is because politicians have a secret word they use when they're talking about pensions, and they call it the third rail. No politician wants to talk about public pensions because it's political suicide. It's touching the third rail in the subway system. Poof, new hairdo. Right? So the reality is that these banking changes reflect the need to have something that's not an IOU, something that's not a promise. So whether it's a bank, an insurance company, or a pension fund, they're being told you need to own something outright. That's not an obligation, not a liability from somebody else simultaneously. You need to own something that is not a promise. And the reality is that pensions are nothing but a bunch of promises. In fact, they were designed 40 years ago, but people are living 27 years longer now than when the pension funds were originally conceived. In order to get the Canadian public pension funds back on track, just to be neutral, not positive or negative, every man, woman, and child in the country would need to contribute $9,000. And remember, not everybody receives a public pension fund. So this is a mess. And so what this boils down to, the reason why you need to own physical bullion is that because it's not a promise. Are you willing to bank your retirement on somebody's promise? I mean, I want you to think long and hard about that. What is it you own that isn't a promise? Companies have management promises, performance promises, fixed income, bonds are all nothing more than a promise by a government. Pensions, another promise by a government. Look, there's promises everywhere and promises get broken all the time, but one thing gold doesn't do is break its promise to hold its value. It can't default. It will never go bankrupt. So make sure it's part of your mix. Your retirement's counting on it. In the meantime, have a wonderful weekend and see you next Friday.